Today is going to be a good day. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to edit beautiful sunset photo in Silkypix Developer Studio Pro. Although I'm using Silkypix Developer Studio Pro, but if you have any other photo editing software, my technique applies the same with any other software. And about my tutorial method, I usually explain quite a bit so that you can understand what tool I'm using, and maybe you can use the exact same tool for different type of photography. So you can take something with you from this tutorial. Now about this particular photo, this is one of my favorite photo I've ever taken. About sunset photograph. Sunset photograph, it's one of the most challenging photo. 50% of the job is actually when you are taking the photograph, so that you don't blow out the sun because you're directly pointing at the sun. Also, even though I can clearly tell that there's a little bit of blown out highlight in the sun, but it's nice and round and you can actually feel it, that it's far in the distance. This photo was taken in Santorini, one of the most famous places in the world for sunset. Now let's jump into my editing method. First of all, I'm going to start with my lens correction. Now it's a micro four third camera. That means that generally it's already done in camera, so I don't need to worry about it. But I'm going to turn on my chromatic aberration because I'm going to have probably quite a bit of a diffraction because I'm pointing directly at the sun. Now, third thing I want to do is to turn on my fringe reduction because it's against the sun again, so you're going to have a little bit of fringing going on. This is after that, white balance. Now, white balance, I'm already happy with overall look, so I'm not going to play with it too much, obviously. Color, it's in neutral, but I'm going to go to the faithful. The reason behind it, because neutral is a bit more oversaturated than faithful, and in this particular scenario, I have a lot of highlight to work with. Obviously, I have to be very careful, especially not blowing out the sun more than it already is. Now in the color representation, I'm going to go to memory color. It's saturated but not too much, which is a very good thing. Now we are done with overall process. Now the challenging part begins. Number one, before I head down, I'm going to fix the level. So I'm going to make sure it's nice and straight. There you go. It's done. I'm going to go to the partial correction tool, which is basically a local correction tool, and turn on my gradual filter so that I can bring some shadow back on the water. But bear in mind, in this scenario, I'm most likely going to have quite a bit of a noise in the shadow area because I'm going to raise the exposure, and given the capacity of the camera, this camera is not the best camera in the planet. This is probably cost about 150 bucks in eBay, but somehow I managed to take this beautiful photograph. So I don't expect too much from my shadow area, so forgive me if you see some shadow or noise in the shadow area, but that's expected. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the white balance adjustment and add some blue in the water so that I can have some nice color contrast. And I'm going to stop it right before the sun so that you can separate the sun from the water. Second thing I'd like to do, I'd like to go to the lightness and add some contrast in the water so that you can feel the water, but I don't want you to see it because it kind of makes it look weird in my taste. Then I will reduce the saturation just a little bit. Now, so far so good. To be honest with you, the photo looks incredible, but I've got a few other challenging things to fix. So I'm going to go to the exposure, reduce highlight a little bit, reduce the shadow, recover some shadow. But I think the shadow slider is not the best slider in the world. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the color dodge HDR, and then add some shadow on the foreground as well. I can go back to my partial correction tool and reduce the lightness, of course, because you don't want it to look like a cheap edit. We are looking good so far. I think we are done. Only thing I've got left is to crop a little bit. So what I can do, you need the sun right in the middle. That's no question. And make it a little bit more square. The reason behind it, I would expect this photo to be printed on my wall. So I would imagine that having exactly the way I want. I'm going to go have a quick check into the distortion, see if it's alright. So I'm going to enable the distortion. I think it's fine. Looks good. So I'm going to look at it in full screen mode and zoom in quite a bit. Looks good. Remember, I did not add any sharpness yet, so it's looking a little blur, right? Because it's a raw file and I haven't added any kind of sharpening there or demosaic sharpening. So I'm going to start with noise reduction, and bear in mind my computer is about to run like F16 because the noise reduction and sharpening is quite processor intuitive. So forgive me, I will find better solution in future, but right now I have to live with it. Now in the noise reduction, I'm going to add fine detail. So what fine detail does? What it does not add any global sharpening. It protects the bright area while adding noise reduction in the shadow area. And now as you can hear, my computer is turning on. It will continue until I stop. In the sharpening, I've got natural sharp. Everything is default. The behind is bokeh preservation. So I'm going to turn this one on. Ringing artifact, so far so good. Outline emphasis, which is basically the radius. So I know that Japanese translation can be kind of weird, but that's well expected. Now I'm gonna add some fringing reduction. What happens? Fringing will reduce some fringing around the edges of the sun. The final thing begin. I'm gonna make it smaller. So the reason behind, I can imagine people looking at this particular photograph on their smartphone, for example Instagram. So does it look good there? So far so good, and zoom back in, it looks good as well. Final thing I'm gonna do is to add demosaic sharpening, and this is when my computer gonna even run even faster with a lot of noise. So what it does is actually add the raw demosaic sharpening, which normally Adobe Photoshop and Capture One add by default using their algorithm, where Silkypix Developer Studio Pro use their algorithm too and add a little mark. Can you see that? That's the mark. So it's saying that I recommend you to add 62. So I'm gonna follow. So I think 63 is saying. There you go, 63. And what I'm going to do, because it's rendering, so you can see the photo being blurred. That's one of the downside of Silkypix Developer Studio Pro, which is the live preview is quite slow. But I'm still continue supporting this software because the output is phenomenal. So I'm going to show it right now in 3, 2, 1. Let's go.